to Nacht, Waffen Pilot Presents, and today we have Terry Lovelace of the incident at Devil's Den. Just a minute, Odin, if you're not going to let me record it, you need to start recording. Okay, I guess we're not going to have a recording on this one. So, all right. Now, when I read your bio, it said that you were an attorney.
Yes. Yes, I spent 6 years in the United States Air Force. Then I finished an undergraduate degree in psychology and a law degree from Western Michigan. And I've been a practicing attorney most of my adult life. I was Assistant Attorney General for the U.S. Territory of American Samoa, and then Assistant Attorney General for the state of Vermont, from which I retired in 2012. So it's nice to be here, by the way. Thank you for the invitation.
Oh,
Pleasure.
I was jazzed when you contacted me. For the audience, our first contact was on a social media that is for business owners. And I had not met Terry Lovelace, and he had given me a recommendation on Alignable. And I was like, who is this guy? So I did some homework, found out who he was, thanked him for the reference, and invited him to the show. So yeah, there's a lot more to social media than just fascist book.
Yeah.
So my personal primary is now on MeWe. So yeah, it's a lot calmer there, and the only person I've ever seen get into any trouble, it was over a blatantly racist statement. So
Then that deserves some trouble.
that does. So it's not, there's no rampant censorship like there is on Facebook. And I have had real problems on Facebook. I was permabanned at one point. And my page that had 603,000 followers got deleted. And I was told I was too dangerous to be on their platform because I was talking about Germans in space.
Whoa.
So
I like to talk about Germans in space.
Awesome. We may do some of that. So anyway, but yeah, that was Alignable has been a really good place, and I found a lot of my friends there. And so I may cough up the money for it.
I'm considering it. I didn't check it as often as I should, but now, I check my Facebook every day. Now I'm falling into the habit of checking Alignable. I've met some very nice people on Alignable.
Yeah, there are. I was surprised to find my daughter-in-law there.
You never know.
But she has a business. My daughter-in-law has a business where she, for a price, will moderate your page for you.
Okay.
And take care of all of the interactions with customers and scheduling and that sort of thing. And she seems to be doing pretty well at it.
That would be worth. That would be worth it. That would be a valuable. I could see where that would be a valuable asset.
Yeah, you just make her an admin on your page, and she handles all the day-to-day stuff and contacts you if there's something that you actually have to handle yourself.
Yeah.
And otherwise just sets you up a schedule to deal with the customers. I mean, how much easier can that be?
About 2.5 hours a day easier.
Yeah. So I have 2 pages. One is for my radio show, and the other one is it's probably not PC to put it this way, but it's a women's magazine.
Well,
Uh,
that.
it's pretty pictures, recipes, music, and a couple of news articles. And I try to keep the news articles as close to objective as possible.
Yeah, I understand. I understand.
When you're dealing with mainstream media and you're dealing with alternative media, and what I tend to do is find 4 or 5 articles along the same lines and pick the one that's most middle of the road. the,
Middle of the road is good. You know,
the the old adage of the truth is in the middle is the approach that I've been taking.
that's pretty much true always.
So what 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 frightens me sometimes is when oh, the socialist group.
You're talking about Antifa?
No,
QAnon?
they're it's the union website that has a well, you've got New American on one side, and you've got I blanked on the name of the place, but I have it bookmarked, which tells you which browser I use. But yeah, I have it bookmarked, and when they are agreeing with New American, that makes me sit up and take notice
Yeah. You know,
because
I,
New American is the John Birchers. So
okay, I'm familiar with that
so
name in the
when
1980s.
the John Birchers and the socialists are agreeing on a topic, you really need to take a look at it.
That's pretty significant.
Yeah. So that's generally the stuff that I will push is the things that the two of them are both agreeing on, especially when what they want is opposite of what the mainstream media wants. At that point, you really need to look at this topic.
Yeah. You know, I like to listen to Reuters, BBC, and Al Jazeera uh, for kind of a
I
different.
like Al Jazeera.
Yeah, I do too.
Al Jazeera, Telesur, Press TV when I can find it. It's censored a lot. It's out of Iran. And have I like Mint Press. It's an alternative. It's an alternative news media with a mostly middle of the road, slightly liberal lean. And I'll balance that with one that's more right leaning. Because if you're not listening to both sides, you'll never find what the middle of the road is. You'll think it's the middle, but it's not.
Yeah. And it's so strange that we're having this conversation about facts and that facts are facts. And
Yeah, there is a objective truth.
there is. There is.
And that's an important distinction to make before we go into all of this other stuff is there is an objective truth that is not subject to perception.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Not
So,
part of someone else's agenda.
yes, there is an objective truth that is not subject to interpretation. And yet at the same time, you'll find a lot of people trying to cover it up for their own agendas. So you can dig deep enough to find it, but you have to know how to look for it. So, As an attorney, district attorney, you would have understood how to find the truth out of the mass of evidence and everybody telling the story for their own benefit.
Yes, that's kind of the game. It is.
So, I you knew I was going to pull this back around.
Oh yeah, yeah. And I enjoyed it very much. I miss it.
Oh, okay. I have a long-term real-world friend who started off as a defense attorney, and then he was the district attorney, and now he's the the superior court judge here. I
Oh,
had
that's a nice position.
um, and we used to go to church together at the church that excommunicated me.
Oh, honey.
And I used to be his kid Sunday school teacher. And his daughter had epilepsy and his son had ADHD with dyslexia.
Ooh,
And so these two kids were in my class, and I treated them like everyone else, and a little bit of special treatment because the girl would sometimes want to go back to the main church to be with her dad, and I would have her escorted so she wasn't alone at any time.
good.
And when I had my last divorce, he picked me out a lawyer.
Oh
So
no, no.
it worked.
It did work.
It did work. He got me a great one, and I was like, cool. We really are friends.
You really are. You really are. I'll tell you. That's
Yeah, he picked me out a good lawyer. He said, I can't do it for you because at that point he was the district attorney. And he said, but I can, I'll send you to this guy. And I went to the guy and I said, so and so said you would be good for what I need. And he just beamed. And at that point, it didn't matter that I only had $1,000 or any of that.
well. It sounds like your ex was an ethical lawyer.
My ex. Oh, news to my followers. My most recent ex was a mafia hitman,
Wow.
and everybody was afraid of him for obvious reasons. And
Lousy retirement, I hear.
yeah, and he had poisoned me. So I was in really bad shape, and no one wanted to touch this with a 10-foot pole. And in fact, the judge assigned to the case said, you're this sick. Why are you divorcing him?
Really?
Yeah. And I'm like, I can't tell you he poisoned me in court. He'll kill me.
I think that's an inappropriate question for the judge anyway, from a judge anyway.
Well, in California, we have no fault divorce. So I
Yeah,
just put incompatibilities. I didn't tell him what the incompatibilities were, nor what drove me to getting a divorce. And, it was a whole lot of stuff that just eventually built up to the point where it was literally leave him or die.
that's a tough position.
And
We don't always choose who we want to love. It's just we just kind of find ourselves in that position sometimes.
yeah, I'm talking too personal. So let's get down to your story.
Sure.
So you had this incident at Devil's Den.
I did. I did in 1977 while I was active duty in the Air Force. I was stationed at Whiteman Air Force Base, which is a little bit southeast of Kansas City. Back then in '77, it was in a remote area. There was nothing out there, And the base itself, the base is still there. It's where they house the B-2 bombers now. Back then it was a SAC base with B-52s with nuclear weapons and a squadron of Minuteman II ICBM missiles spread out all over the farmland. And I was a first responder. I was an EMT and a medic. And I worked the emergency room. Drove an ambulance, worked night shift from 11 until 8 for most of my time there. And that's where I met my friend Tobias. And that's the guy that came up to me about 2 a.m. one morning while we're working and said, "Hey, man, I got an idea. Let's go camping." So that's the genesis of the story. That's where we got started. Man. And neither one of us, and I remember telling Toby, I said, "Are you nuts, man? I'm from St. Louis, Missouri. I had never been camping." And I said, "I know you're from Flint, Michigan, Toby, and I don't think you've ever been camping before. So, what's up with this?" And in retrospect, I really do wonder what was up with this, because it was just an ill-conceived, harebrained idea that made it all the more feel like we were on an appointment, keeping an appointment more than the camping trip.
Well, sometimes that's actually what's going on. But I'll let you go ahead.
Sure. Well, it was a 6.5-hour drive from Whiteman down to across the Arkansas border, where we had the Ozark National Forest on the east side, on the left, and then on the west was Devil's Den State Park, which was an Arkansas state park.
Okay.
We had the idea. I wanted to stay in a campground, where there were showers and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I like that kind of camping too.
Yeah, I like the Hilton the best, but Toby's like, his thing was, he was an amateur astronomer and he just lived to watch the night sky. And he heard there was a plateau somewhere in the park where we could get on top of this plateau, have the whole place to ourselves, set up a little campground. And I was into photography, and I had an ice camera, and we both lived on the base. So when you live on a nuclear base,
what is an ice camera?
Nice.
Nice. Okay.
Yeah, just a little Yashica 35 millimeter SLR, but I had a little dark room set up. I made 35 millimeter black and white prints. But living on a nuclear base, there's not a lot you can do with a camera. Photography is kind of frowned upon. So
yeah, they don't like you to show all of the secret stuff.
So we had to get off base for me to use my camera. So actually, it did kind of make sense.
Yeah.
And we packed and we drove down there. And we had a series of missteps along the way that I'll leave out just for sake of brevity. But we got down there and we kind of dodged the pavilion and where the park rangers are, and where you go to get a camping permit. And we picked a paved road that was going north west and just drove. And that road degraded to gravel, then the dirt. And then we came to a chain across the road with a stern warning saying, keep out, do not enter, no camping, no hunting, no fishing, no hiking, no nothing,
Yeah.
And I told Toby, I said, well, I guess we're going to have to find another way. And he's like, no, man, wait, hang on. He hops out of the car. And what they had done is they had taken that chain and just looped it around with a padlock and draped it over the post on the opposite side.
They do a lot of that around here too.
So lazy way to do it, I guess. So he hops out, he picks up the chain and drops it to the ground, and boom, so we're in, and we feel like, man, we're feeling like Lewis and Clark now, we're real outdoorsmen. And we drive, and Toby had an unerring sense of direction. He always knew where to go. And there were a lot of twists and turns, but he was like, make a right here, make a left here, and he got us there. And
cool.
We drove up this cliff to this plateau. And I think I might have sent you a photograph of the plateau from an aerial view and a side view. But it was an elevated area where from the top of this plateau where we stayed we could see the tops of the forest all around us. And it was just a cool place. And we were in a remote area. We were miles from anywhere or anybody. And we set up our little campsite there by the tree line. And, we did all the fun stuff you do when you go camping, which was all new to us. Build a campfire, burn hot dogs, do all that stuff. And we
burn hot dogs. That's not how I camp. I'm one of those that I make the stove in a fire pit and put a oven grill over the top of it, and I actually cook.
So you know what you're doing.
Yeah, I know what I'm doing.
That would have been most helpful.
Yeah, I'm one of those, I do scrambled eggs with sausage on a campfire.
Oh.
So, yeah.
And I left my hand axe and my lantern that I borrowed from a neighbor. I left those articles in my garage. So getting wood for the campfire was kind of a challenge. It was more of a brush fire, but it worked. We set up our little tent. We had our air mattresses on either side of the fire, and it was
You
getting
had air mattresses. Oh my.
We were first class, and
You mean you don't know how to use your heel and make the holes for your hips and
that would have been handy now that you mention it.
Uh-huh.
But we were 22 and 23, so we were good. We just kind of rolled with it. And I was kicked back on this air mattress, and we'd already eaten, and it was getting on in the evening. And I remember saying to my friend, Toby, this really is pretty cool. I can understand. I can see the allure of this. I can see why people do this. It's really very pleasant. And it was,
It is. It's very pleasant.
Yeah, it was June, and the heat of the day had ended, and we had a nice little breeze going, and it's just pleasant. And this sounds so cliche that I almost hate to say it, but it's true. And other people have told me they've experienced this too, and I bet you've heard of this. We were talking, and while we're talking, the crickets and the tree frogs are making so much noise that we have to raise our voices to be heard by one another.
Oh, yeah.
And,
especially once they get used to you're going to be there.
Yeah. So, and we just kind of took it for granted, didn't pay, you tune it out, right?
Yeah.
And there was a lull in our conversation, and I realized that it was quiet.
Uh-oh.
And uh-oh. And I'm like, Toby, man, is it really this quiet out here? And he's, like he would know, right? And he's like, yeah, don't worry about it, man. We've been laughing, we've been cutting up, we've been making a lot of noise. The crickets, the tree frogs, the noises, they'll all be back. 15 minutes, you watch, you'll see, they'll come back. And I'm like, okay. But I got to tell you, it unnerved me. And had I been there alone, I'd have been out of there. But, I wasn't going to be that guy. So I hung in there. And we had some minor chit-chat back and forth. And I do remember noting that even the breeze stopped. Because now the fire was just burning straight up.
That's unusual.
I recall from the flickering light of the fire looking at the tree and back of the tent and thinking, one of these leaves should at least move. And I never saw one move. And it had it just had a surreal feel to it. It didn't feel right. And my friend's got his head turned to the left and he's looking at something. And I'm just about to ask him, hey man, what are you looking at? And he says, Terry, were those lights there before? And I'm like, what lights? What are you talking about? And he was seated so that his torso was in the way of the horizon, and I couldn't see. So I backed up and kind of half stood up, looking over his shoulder, and on the horizon there was a set of 3 little stars in a tight triangular pattern. And they were sitting just above the horizon, and they were out of place. I mean, they were too far above the horizon.
What year was this?
1977, June of 1977.
Okay. So it's before the TR3 series.
Yeah, I don't know when that TR3 thing
In the
came
80s.
in the 80s. Yeah.
The 80s.
So we had never seen anything like it. And we were kind of familiar with things that fly. And, you know, it couldn't have been lights from a, parking lot or something because it was too high up.
Hmm.
And Toby says, I think it's a plane, even though we didn't know any plane that had a triangular light configuration. But he says, yeah, it's probably headed right toward us, giving us the illusion that it's standing still. Well, we watched, and that wasn't the case. It was static. And then while we're debating this, these three lights turned, and they turned like they were on an axis.
Okay.
And they did about a 3/4 turn and ended up with the base of the triangle being parallel with the horizon, and then the apex pointing up.
So
And
it just all shifted together.
it did. And they
Okay.
all moved in unison, and then it started to move on.
Like they were corners of a single object.
Correct. We weren't looking at a three objects working in unison. We were working at one solid
Okay.
object. And it verified that. It started to go up into the sky, and that got us kind of excited. But then I had this feeling of calm wash over me that I can't really explain. It was like mild sedation almost. Um, where
I've
we,
heard of this stuff before.
yeah, where we were real excited, and no fear, never had any fear whatsoever. And now I'm feeling this mild sedation and maybe even a little disinterest. I felt, the best way I can say it is I felt more like an observer than a participant. And
Okay.
it was just strange. And we watched this thing as it climbed up into the sky. And again, the 3 points always remained equidistant to one another, and it went up,
Okay.
reached what I call a ceiling, and then it started to descend. And then as it descended, we could really tell it was a solid object as it got bigger, because it would pass over fields of stars, and then as they went past, those stars would pop back out. Also, on this night, there were 1 trillion stars out. I mean, the sky was like the sky in back of you, the sky was blue. And the area inside these 3 points was black. So we knew it was a solid object. And it tumbled. And it did this, this somersault-like thing where the tip would go down and then it would rotate and come back up. But the one of the points of the triangle, the apex I call it, the one pointed as, always stayed pointed in our direction. So we felt that this thing was coming toward us. And again, we felt no fear. And when it did the somersault thing, I remember having the thought, this thing isn't just out of control, it's moving with purpose.
One of the engines that's used out there is one that creates a gravity well in front of the ship.
Okay.
And so you actually operate by falling into this hole, that the hole is constantly moving. So
Wow.
it can give the impression of the ship being out of control.
That's got to be more efficient than thrust. I mean,
It is.
yeah.
It is.
Yeah, and this was big. And deeper.
Crappy little details I remember, yeah.
Oh, oh. But we were in another world. We were in a different place mentally.
Oh, yeah. When you start seeing things that don't fit with what you understand technology to be, your mind goes immediately into what is that? And you focus in on it. So if you're in that mode and you're suddenly disinterested, yeah, that's something to notice, because that means there's some sort of mental effect.
There was. There's no doubt in my mind that we were under some type of influence. I'd
Hmm.
almost say control, but influence for sure. And this thing stopped. We saw it move across because we were on this elevated plateau. We could see it move across the forest and see the 3 points of light reflected on the tops of the trees, and then the shadow in the middle. And it ended up at a height over our heads of about 3,000 feet. Now, luckily, we didn't set up our campsite in the middle, or we'd have been right underneath the thing. We had set up our campsite off to the tree line, so we were kind of off to the side. Um,
Okay.
and we saw this thing, and it came to a stop. And, neither one of us said a word. We were just watching. And then from underneath this thing, directly in the middle, there came a beam of light, about 6 inches in diameter, a little larger than a softball, and it was a column of white light. And it had a visible quality to it, like a high power searchlight cutting through fog. You can
Okay.
see it.
So it was semi-solid.
It was, and there was no fog, so it was an oddity. I don't know what it was. And it landed right in the middle of our campfire. And we just looked at one another. And it stayed on for about 60 seconds, maybe. And then, like someone flipped a switch, it turned off. But then, right after that, in its stead, there came this laser. Well, lasers were kind of a new concept in 1977. And I'd seen them
Yeah.
on television, but I'd never seen one in real life. And there was a laser beam about the diameter of a pencil that was purplish blue.
That was pretty big.
Yeah, yeah, the side
Yeah.
diameter of a
I
pencil.
was taking in 77 I was taking engineering physics at Riverside City College, and we did a field trip to UC Riverside where they were doing research into lasers, and the laser beams were less than a quarter inch. So
Yeah,
yeah,
this was
you're
taken.
talking a pretty good sized laser for that time period.
Yeah, and it was bright. I mean, it was brilliantly. I wouldn't want it to shine in my eyes, but
No.
what it did was it would appear in one spot and then be there for maybe a tenth of a second and then reappear in another spot. So that within a span of 1 second, this thing has danced 10 different places all over our campsite. And that's what it did. And it did this illusion that it was dancing all over the campsite. It hit the car, it hit the tent. It struck me in the chest twice. I didn't feel a thing. I know it hit my friend. Uh, and I remember having the feeling this thing's checking us out. Um, I don't think I
Yeah,
used.
that's the only thing that makes any kind of logical sense, was that it was a sensor of some sort.
Yeah. So that lasted for maybe 3 minutes. It felt more like 30, but I think in reality it was probably about 3 minutes. And then that turned off. And then we just sat there in the silence for a few minutes. And then I felt sleepy. I felt so sleepy. All I wanted to do was go in that tent and go to bed. And my friend stood up and said, "Show's over," and grabbed his air mattress. Yeah. And he went to the tent and threw his air mattress in and just fell in on top of it. And I was right behind him. I threw my air mattress in. I didn't take off my shirt. I didn't undo my boots, which would be significant later on. I'll get into that later. But I didn't unlace my boots. I just fell on top of this air mattress, and I was out. Uh, and I don't know how long we were out, but we're guessing probably between 5.5 hours. Both of
Okay.
our watches, we wore, well, as EMTs, a watch
Hmm.
is a tool of the trade, and you need one. And we
Hmm.
both had decent wind up kind of watches, which were, what you
Yeah.
had back in the day. I had a nice Elgin watch that stopped at 240s. Toby stopped at 241. Neither of those watches, to my knowledge, ever ran again. I wish I'd saved that watch, but I didn't. Um, anyway, I was out, but then I woke up with these lights flashing through the canvas of the tent, and they were, remember the old school kind of flash bulbs that you used to
Oh
put in a
yeah.
camera, and
Yeah,
someone
the
would take
ones
your
that were,
picture.
and they would leave a blue thing.
A blue thing, yeah. You would blink and see a blue dot in front of your face for the next hour,
Yeah.
right? Well, I woke up to these flashing lights, and they were not on a regular sequence. They were intermittent, and they were yellow, white, and kind of an off orange, and they were flashing through the. And when they flashed, they would light up the inside of that tent like a ballpark at night. I mean, they were bright. But when they weren't flashing, it was pretty dark in there. So I wake up, but I'm out of it. I don't have myself together mentally, and I'm thinking, oh, these must be like a park ranger's truck with the overhead lights.
Yeah,
Park rangers there to kick us out.
that was before they had the blue ones in too.
Yeah, yeah. So I thought I'm grasping for a reasonable explanation for this, and I'm thinking, yeah, park ranger's truck. That's right. That's what has to be.
Well,
And
that's what we always do is look for something reasonable.
yeah, our minds want to make sense of things, and
Yeah.
when we encounter something that's so paranormal that our mind tries to wrestle with it, and so I sat up and realized that I was in a lot of pain. I was hurting all over. And I'll
Mm.
get into that in a second. And I looked down, and one of these flashes of white light, I could see my shoes had been unlaced. My combat boots had been unlaced about 3/4 of the way down. And I didn't do that. And I took off, and that confused me. I took off one of my boots, and my sock was on sideways. Now, one of the things they teach in the military is to take care of your feet. Because if you don't,
Yeah.
someone else is going to have to take care of you, and it's going to be two people out of action. So I took off both boots, put my socks on properly, put my boots on, and laced them up, and that's when through when one of these flashes of white light came, I could see that my friend who's right next to me is on his knees, and he's looking at something intently out of the window, not the window, but the flap of the tent, where you go in and out. And I'm like, Toby, man, what is it? Was it park rangers? What's out there? And in one of these flashes of light, I could see that he had tear tracks down the right side of his cheeks.
Mm.
And that scared me. And all of that,
Yeah, I remember those days. It wasn't real popular for men to be crying.
well, you know what? I knew this guy pretty well. We worked together for 3 years. I knew that if he was crying, he had a good reason to be crying.
Yeah.
So, and I asked him, what is it? What's out there? And he just did the universal finger across the lips thing and said, they're still out there. And I'm like, who, Toby? Who's still out there? And I'm maneuvering to my knees so I can look. And I pull back the flap of my tent just about an inch. And I peer out and I see two things. That this craft, this giant triangle, the size of a Walmart, right? That was 3,000 feet over our heads some 6 hours, 5 hours ago, has now descended. And this thing is just 30 feet over the floor of this meadow, the top of this plateau. The top of that plateau was flat as a pool table, and this thing sat right on top of it. And if you look at the aerial photographs today of Devil's Den, you'll see it. It's triangular shaped, and it's clear cut. There should be 40-year-old mature trees on top of that plateau, and there are not.
Mm.
The government spends a lot of money to clear cut that for some reason in the middle of nowhere. But I saw that this thing had dropped to 30 feet over the meadow, and the second thing that I saw what I first thought to be kids, and I'm talking maybe a dozen or 15 kids. And I'm like, Toby, man, what are these kids doing out here? And that's when he said, Terry, man, those ain't no little kids. Don't you remember? They took us and they hurt us. And, I've never had a clear linear memory of what happened to me. But when he said those words,
That's hard when you don't have a clear
Yeah,
linear memory.
all I have is bits and pieces. But when he said those words, that's when the fear came on with a vengeance. And
Hmm.
I had mental flashes, images, flashbacks, I guess, of being inside this thing. And they were they were so incredible um, that it was just overwhelming. And I could see why I was close to tears myself, out of fear. And
Yeah.
and Toby says, look at them again, Terry. They're not human beings. And when I looked, I could only see them real close because we were a fair distance away. But in a flash of white light, especially, I could see them pretty clearly. And they were paired up in twos and threes, and they weren't human beings. Their heads were disproportionately large. They had spindly bodies, and Penny, they had the most unique gait. They walked almost like their knees were partially hinged backward or something. They had a really weird
Okay.
walk. And they weren't walking around like looking on the ground or searching for something. Uh, they were walking around just kind of checking things out like tourists or something, you know.
Yeah.
And while we're watching, um, and we're scared to death, we're going to make too much noise and draw attention to ourselves. But they were done with us. It didn't matter at that point. Then another light came on from underneath this thing. And this time it was a column of that white light that had that visible light feature to it.
Yeah.
It was a column. This thing was about 30 feet off the ground, and the diameter of this column was about 30 feet. So it was about as wide as it was tall. And these little guys, and having an understanding of physics, this may make more sense to you. These little guys would wander into this light and just dissolve. And visually, it looked like the 1960s Star Trek thing. And I was never a big sci-fi fan, and still aren't. But these little guys, people would go into this transporter or something,
Yeah.
and they would show them dissolve. And that's what this was like. And we watched this until the last two of these little guys walked into the light, and they dissolved. And as soon as they were gone, the light turns out, and the lights immediately on the points of the triangle stopped being multicolored and switched to all white, and they stayed on. And while we watched, we saw this thing take off. And it didn't take off like a rocket ship at all. It took off like a hot air balloon. It just
Yeah.
took off.
That's consistent with the falling into the gravity well.
That is,
Hmm.
bits and pieces of this. I'm glad that you recognize, because you're confirming things other people have told me.
Well, I served with a human military in space. I served with the Germans out there, and when they first went into space, they had an anti-grav engine that basically produced that same gravity well. And they eventually switched to other propulsion systems because the version they had produced so much radiation that the crews were dying from radiation poisoning. So
Wow.
they they were pretty determined to leave because the crews were just dying right and left. And it became almost a joke about, oh yeah, you want to be a Hanabu pilot, meaning you have a death wish.
Wow.
So yeah, they were that dangerous.
A friend of mine lent me a book just a couple weeks back. I wish I had it handy, and it talks about Nazis and the secret space program.
Well, the Germans in space are not Nazis anymore. That was a political party that lasted in Germany for about 30 years. And There are remnants of it, but that's all it was a political party. And the people in space are Germans, and they follow a Teutonic culture, and they use the symbols, but those had been German symbols for millennia.
The ones that look like runes, right?
Yeah, the ones that look like runes. And they had been using those for thousands of years already. The runes were actually their letters before they westernized their script.
Okay, okay, that makes
So,
sense. Yeah, my
um,
mother's maiden name was Hess,
okay.
and her family, she's second generation American. My grandparents moved here um, from the south of Germany, which is more agricultural, I guess.
It has thicker dirt and better weather.
Yeah, they were farmers. So,
Yeah.
um,
My family, um, I'm a Merovingian. So, my family came through Great Britain. And when we were exiled to the United States, we became farmers.
yes.
And yes, my family was exiled by Cromwell. In fact, one of my ancestors, he and his daughters were dumped off the ship a quarter mile offshore. Cromwell was hoping they would drown.
Wow. Oliver
Yeah,
Cromwell and the Civil War.
yes. So that tells you a lot about who my family was. We were all Jacobins and royals. And yeah,
Not the Roundheads.
we were.
Yeah.
I've been trying not to cuss in these, but we were in deep shit when
Oh,
Cromwell won.
yeah. No, no, no.
um, yeah. Um, names, names that people would know in my family tree. Uh, the Fendleys were descended from Macbeth. Uh,
Is there
the
an Irish influence there?
the Neils. William Smythe Neil was the one that was dumped offshore. He was Prince of Ireland at the time. Um, who else was there? There was a family called Blackwood who were De Veres, which is the bloodline of Jesus. And there were Stuarts who were descended from De Bruce. And De Bruce's were also the bloodline of Jesus. And there were Sinclairs, and they are the bloodline of Jesus. And yeah, these are
Yeah.
my people.
I could understand why government might want those people out of town. Yeah.
Yeah, it was a way they were hoping, because this was in the late 1600s, early 1700s, and they were seriously hoping that America was wild enough that these people would just die.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it was a way to kill them without having blood on their hands.
Yeah.
So yeah, um, that's who my family are. And the people who have been taken for service with the Germans are generally Merovingian descent on at least one grandparent.
Yeah. I was told by, and I'm getting way ahead of myself here. Um, I was visited by an entity in 2017, and I explained this in the back of my book. Um, in 2012, I had gone to an ER because I was already retired, so I get my medical care from the VA, and I
Mm-hmm.
couldn't bear weight on my right leg. And I went to an ER, the VA, got my leg x-rayed, and the technician said, let's do that again. She took another set of x-rays, and then she says, Mr. Lovelace, were you ever injured by shrapnel or in some type of accident? Or And I'm like, no, I spent 6 years in Missouri. I mean, the only harm's way that I was in was mosquitoes. And I said I'd never injured that leg in any way. And she said, well, I called the radiologist down to take a look at it. And I think I sent you x-rays. Should have x-rays.
You sent me the x-rays and I saw them on your website.
Okay.
Yes, I do my homework for these.
Oh, I know you do. And I regret not getting you a book in time, by the way.
Well, thank you.
But I will remedy that. I promise. I have you and 5 other people.
I promise to read it when it shows up.
Okay. So, radiologist says, actually what he did was he popped the x-ray into a light box and he walked over to my leg and he poked me in the leg down by my knee on the right side, lateral, and says, it'll be right there. And I'm like, what'll be right there? And he says, you're going to have a scar right there. And he says, so you've got a foreign object underneath your skin. And he says, it's deep enough into your fascia and tissue that whatever violated the integrity of your skin to embed this object in your leg, whatever kind of misadventure that might have been, good choice of words.
Very good choice of words.
Would have left a scar. And I insisted I didn't have a scar. But you know what is interesting is, the thing that was above my knee that looked about the size of a fingernail with 2 wires attached. It was definitely a man-made, or it was a manufactured structure. It wasn't actually.
That's a good phrase for it. Manufactured and leave wear up in the air.
Yes. So I realized when I looked at this X-ray that it lay right over what I called my numb spot, and that deserves an explanation. In '79,
that does deserve an explanation. A numb spot.
Yeah, when I separated from the military in '79, I started running, and they called it jogging back then, and it was kind of a new thing. I mean, really, if you think about it, before about 1969, you never saw people out running on the street just for.
That's because they had to work so hard physically that they stayed fit.
Probably, yeah. So I tried this and I liked it, and I ran for 40 years. But I noticed that every single time that I ran, and this every time I ran, at about the 2-mile mark in my run, there was a spot on my knee that was right over where this thing lay that would go completely numb. And I could take a pin and delineate the edges of it. It was circular, and it would last for about 30 minutes and then fade. And in 1982, I mentioned it to my doctor because I mentioned it to a couple of other runners, and they're like, I don't know, I never heard of that before. And my doctor kind of blew it off, and she said, well, it sounds like a histamic reaction that would cause you.
Like an allergy.
Yes. And she says, if it's not interfering with your run, I wouldn't worry about it. So I didn't, for 40 years. But when I saw that X-ray, that I knew that these things had put their hands on me. I made that connection right away. And that just,
if that's the only anomaly you've got in your past, it makes sense to make that connection.
Yeah. And then he said, and there's more. And he popped up the second X-ray that shows the calf muscle below my knee. This thing was above my knee, and in the calf muscle of my leg below my knee, right in the middle of my calf muscle, there's a collection of objects like about the size of Tic Tacs, and they're in a floral pattern with a little dot in the middle. And
that's interesting.
That's what he said. And he said, well, first of all, he said, well, you've got some bones in your lower leg. And I said, well, doctor, aren't I supposed to have some bones in my lower leg?
And then he says extra ones.
Yeah, what he said was, well, I don't normally see bone tissue sprout in the middle of a muscle, much less arrange themselves in a symmetrical pattern. And he said, you, sir, have a very interesting knee. And there were some curious developments with the Veterans Administration in that I had a great deal of difficulty getting my X-rays, um, including
I bet.
including a threat to take it to the um, district court, United States District Court in Dallas. So I know how to do that. Um, so they
Yeah,
gave,
as a lawyer, you would know how to do that. Yes.
and that comes in handy. And
I've had trouble getting some of my test results too, but I haven't had the ability to file the proper paperwork.
well, you know what? Even if you do, I mean, I got my medical records. That was one of the first things I did. And when we got back from this camping trip, um, and actually should pick that back up because there's a lot more to that story that should be known.
Okay, we
When
can go back. We have another hour.
wonderful, wonderful. Good. When when we left, actually we didn't want to leave. I didn't want to leave. Uh, I didn't want to be out in the open to run to the car. I felt like I'd be vulnerable. I mean, all I had was a
Well,
piece of
that makes
canvas
sense.
over my head, but I felt, you know, secure being undercover, so to speak. And but you know, today I still have an aversion to walking out in the open. I will walk a mile around an open field. I will not walk across an open field by myself. Um, I can't do it. I freak out. So my friend Toby said, you know, we got to get out of here. Because we had sat there like two little scared rabbits for about 30 minutes. And he said, you grab your car keys and I'll grab my flashlight. Let's just start to the car and get out of here. And I'm like, man, can you navigate me out of here without breaking an axle? And he's like, yeah, I got you covered, you know. And he did. But you know, I don't understand this. I can't reconcile these feelings to this day. But we left that meadow, that plateau. We were two different people than we were when we got there.
Yeah.
I really felt like we went there as late teenagers and we left as adults. And another thing that I can't reconcile is here this guy was, my best friend. We worked together, socialized together, barbecue on the weekends. He was just my friend. And for some odd reason, I wanted nothing to do with the guy. And it belies credulity that two people would have this kind of experience and experience this type of trauma like we did and not want to talk about it, not want to, you know, swap stories and decompress and validate each other's. But we didn't do that. We hardly spoke to one another. As a matter of fact, the only conversation we had.
Actually a common trauma response. You either want to socialize and talk about it, or you want to pretend it didn't happen.
Yes. I'm finding that out. I'll tell you, in the back of my book, I put an email address and I said, look, I'm not a doctor or a therapist, but if you've had an experience, I'd like to hear about it. And
Well, since we formed an SSP Experiencers Veterans group on Facebook 2016, I've probably been contacted by 500 people, and some of them want to just spill everything. Like you said, they want the validation. And others, it's like, well, I was there.
yeah,
And 3 weeks later, you might get another detail out of them.
yeah. You know, Maisha invited me to her group,
Mm-hmm.
and I I thought about it and I didn't go. I've been invited to another veterans group and I didn't go. Um, you know, I'm comfortable.
Misha's good. Misha's group is good, especially now that she's separated the people into the different categories. When I was going to her group, she had everybody together. And my memories were terrorizing.
Yeah.
Some,
Well, you
some
would
of
fall
us,
into that group. You would fall
yeah.
into that veterans group. I mean, you were in service, so yeah,
Well,
service. I mean, irrespective of the branch, whether it's recognized or not.
I was in several wars, and I have PTSD. And when I started talking about the flashbacks,
Yes.
the people in the group would start talking about how negative I was, and the new age stuff would come to the top. And I had already been excommunicated because I had altars as a result of what the CIA had done to me as a child.
Yeah.
And Christians see altars as demonic
Demonic.
possession,
Yeah,
which it's not.
I know.
And New Age, when you talk about what happened to you, they declare that you're negative and low vibe, and they will cut contact with you as well. And so I've gotten to where they just mention the name of their faith, and I start to shake and have nervousness and total PTSD response
Yeah.
just from the name of their faith. They don't even have to interact with me. Just say, "Oh, I'm a Christian," or "I'm in New Age," and I will start to have a reaction. And people don't understand. It's like, well, you were a Christian for how many years? You went to seminary, and the name of the faith puts you in this kind of stress? Well, I've been through 104 exorcisms and still got excommunicated.
Wow.
That's trauma.
That's trauma. And I don't, I mean, I think that you have to, I've been diagnosed with PTSD twice.
Mhm.
Both
Well,
times,
yeah,
uh,
a real abduction experience is a trauma.
yes, and I never told them I was abducted. So my official diagnosis, they did an MMPI, Minnesota
Mhm.
Multiphasic Personality, and 500 questions.
Oh
Um,
yeah, I've had those a couple of times.
and that's what diagnosed me as PTSD. But they put down the diagnosis as both times as PTSD etiology unknown because they couldn't tie it to a specific. I didn't have sexual abuse as a child. Thankfully, I wasn't. I didn't have any major calamities in my life except being, you know, taken by aliens in 1977 when I was 22 years old.
Um, my Minnesota multiphasic came back that I had a split personality and that I had PTSD, and they assumed it was parental and spousal abuse, which I also had. So the diagnosis has been there all along, but they want to pretend.
Yeah, I was underwhelmed. I got to tell you with the mental health counseling that I visits that I went to, one or two.
Well, mine was not the military on Earth. Um, Mine was with the local health system. Um,
Uh,
we have Adventist Health here, and their solution was to drug me into oblivion. And they were actually quite angry when I took myself off the meds and refused to take any more. And it was, well, you've either been anxious or depressed every time that I've seen you, and I've been seeing you for 25 years. And I looked him in the eyes and I said, I'm an MK Ultra survivor. Said it very quiet, calm, deadpan. And he turned chalky white and said, okay. And I said, and I'm getting treatment. And he goes, how? And I said, my partner is an Iroquois shaman, and we are using Native American shamanic soul fragment retrieval techniques followed up with Jungian shadow work. I said, and your pills get in the way.
Good
And
for you.
he goes, that works, but it's still on my list of diagnoses for the hospital.
Yeah, yeah. Well, they tried to drug both my friend and I when we spent I spent 3 days and 2 nights in the hospital. The injuries we received was I had the worst sunburn I'd ever had in my life, but it was on
That
every
that
square inch of my body. I mean, soles
that
of my
that
feet.
that solid light you talked about,
Yeah.
that creates burns.
Well, we were burnt to a crisp, and also as a result of that, we were dehydrated, seriously
Hmm.
dehydrated. As a matter of fact, we were admitted as acutely ill. Um, and I also had what they called flash burns to my eyes. It's the same burns that a arc welder would get if they didn't use that hood over their
Hmm.
eyes. And it's basically what it is. It's a sunburn to the cornea of your eye, and it
Well,
hurts. You know, it feels
you
like you have sand in your eyes.
from the sunburn and the cornea burn, I'm going to assume that you were in that transport as well,
I was. I was indeed.
because what you described of being undressed and having chips in your body is consistent with having been on the ship. You said you had flashbacks of being on the ship.
Oh yeah,
This is all consistent.
yeah. I mean, I've never had that. Like I said, I've never had that clear linear memory of the events, but I do
Hmm.
have fragments. I do have bits and pieces. Uh,
Hmm.
and
And that's a failure of their technology that you have bits and pieces, because proper mind wipe technique would have completely left you wondering what the hell happened.
well, you know what? I'm glad that I have a memory, albeit fractured. I look at my friend, and my friend did not do well. And he was a brilliant kid. I mean,
Hmm.
I knew I was destined for law school. He was going to be an astronomer. He took two physics classes on the on-campus extension college, and aced them both. And he was determined to be going to graduate school, be a cosmologist or an astronomer. So he was a really bright kid. And after this, he did not do well. And I think what happens is I think that because they suppress that memory, that over the years, I think bits and pieces of that seep up into the conscious mind.
Hmm.
My
The
undergrad,
subconscious remembers even if the conscious mind doesn't.
yes,
And you have to bring it up into the conscious mind to clear it. Otherwise, it stays in the body forever.
yeah. And if you don't
And
reconcile it and
it
come to grips with it,
yeah, a lot of the people who tell people like me, well, just stop thinking about it. All that does is force it back into the body, and you end up sick. And one of the things that I'm going to venture forth as a theory for your friend's problem. Back in the day, now I was in high school and junior college in the 70s. And back in the day, most of us, at least at a cultural level, had this cultural Christianity thing going where there were angels, demons, humans, and God. And anything else that showed up wasn't real.
it either had, you're right, it either had to fall into one of those categories or it was an illusion, a mirage, a fantasy. Yeah.
Exactly. So here you had a physical experience with extraterrestrials, I'm assuming,
Yes.
and it didn't fall into a category that he could easily assign it.
He never could reconcile it. I think you're spot
He
on.
he could never reconcile it with his belief system.
He
Now, this is the excuse that Eisenhower gave for not telling the public that ETs were real, was that the population couldn't handle it.
Yeah.
And that was the excuse for kidnapping a whole generation of children and mind fracturing us to send us into space because adults couldn't handle it. Adults went crazy, adults died. Children's minds and sense of reality were more pliable.
Pliable's the right word.
And so that was the reason they chose children. And they chose young children because our mind would fracture instead of going catatonic. And the fracturing process limited the memory space for the events they didn't want to be exposed. They could trap it in an altar.
You know, I had experiences from age 4 through 9, and then again on a single event when I was age 11, and I saw a UFO. I saw a flying disc outside my bedroom window.
What happened the younger age?
Here's what happened. I explained this in my book. I had these little entities that would come into my room at night and step out of the shadows, and there were 4 of them. And I know I lose people on this because they think, oh, that can't be true. But they were dressed as circus monkeys. They were about 2.5 feet tall, and they had long tails, and they all wore like a paper mask with a big grin painted on it, and they had large yellow eyes. And I'm convinced that these things didn't really look like that. I think that that's the way they appeared to me. They knew that in my mind's eye, I would see them as benign, as somewhat comedic, not a threat. And
there is such a thing as a screen memory.
yes.
And they can take and create a screen memory that is benign.
Yes, and they did for me.
And they can alter your emotional reactions in that screen memory.
Absolutely.
So I had literally decades of every Friday, I would dream that I was a mermaid in a kelp bed.
Wow.
That was my cover memory for being taken for service.
Yes. Wow. That is spectacular.
Yeah.
Well, I knew that they took me as a child. And I went to they took me to a white domed room with other kids there. And it had a padded gray floor. And all of us kids, we spoke telepathically and played. And these kids weren't kids from my neighborhood or my school. I don't know who they were. I've often wondered if I ran across one of them today, would I recognize them?
The kids who were part of my training group from ages 4 to 9, the ones that I met real world as opposed to anything else, I knew them by how they felt. We have a different energy.
Are you an empath?
I'm one of those Claire people.
Yeah.
Okay. I have no memory from before I was taken. They had mind wiped me when they took me to Langley. So when I came back, I didn't even know my family. But I could see into other dimensions, interact with beings that were not human and were not solid. And when I would talk about it to my family, my father would beat the crap out of me and tell me that I was a liar. So I had to learn what he could and couldn't see. What he could see was all I could talk about.
Yeah, because that's real.
Because that was real. So I can tell you what's 3D and what isn't, because if it was 3D, I could talk about it. If it wasn't, I couldn't.
Yeah.
So I've had 61 years of telling the difference between what I can see and what everyone else can.
Yeah.
And telepathy is a real thing, and I don't do telekinesis, but I have friends who do. Um, I can see future overviews, but not what an individual will experience. So,
I think they leave us some gifts that are kind of meant to compensate, maybe. They gave me.
I was modified by the CIA for my service in space. I was given ET DNA basically by what today we call CRISPR. It
I know
was
this.
specific additions that were designed to give me certain abilities because there was a job description that they had to have ETs for, and they wanted humans to be able to do it. And I was one of them that they designed to do this. So in their point of view, I'm a truck, something that they designed to fill a job.
I understand that.
And so my job designation is navigator. The job description is when I'm in service, I am chipped into the ship's computer, and together we take the ship into hyperspace and we bring it out of hyperspace at the appointed space-time coordinates with no organic life forms stuck inside anything inorganic or each other. The Philadelphia experiment that
Oh yeah,
there were
I
men
can.
inside the bulkheads, inside the tarmac.
Yeah,
That was resolved by having a navigator, because the machinery could not tell the difference between organic and inorganic, and the navigator can.
I got it. I got
So I don't function by myself. There's a lot of mathematical computations involved, and the computer does that part. And I use the psi abilities, and together we take the entire thing into hyperspace. And hyperspace drive is how we navigate the galaxy, and we use a pre-existing wormhole system to navigate to other galaxies. There's a pre-existing wormhole system in this galaxy, and the German solar knot is a stylized map of it. So,
I've got a question for you that's bothered me a long time, and that is the craft itself. Is that organic? Is that a living sentient being? Or is that a nuts and bolts mechanical object?
it depends on which race you were interacting with.
Okay, so it could be one or another depending
It
on.
could be either one, depending on which race you were interacting with. And there are over 1,000 races that meet that physical description. So I can't tell from what you described who you interacted with.
Yeah.
I wish I could. It would solve a lot of questions for you.
Well, one of the things that I remember, you'd ask about being inside the ship. I remember that I don't know how they got us inside the ship. As a matter of fact, I'm not sure we were even in the ship because the space that we were in was much bigger. I mean, like tenfold bigger than the thing that was the size of Walmart. I mean, the thing outside looked like a medical building, but this was like being in a football stadium.
That
And
that is
I think they
that.
may have taken us someplace else, or maybe they have a different set of physics that allow for something that's, you know, allows that.
It's a hyperspace field can do that.
Well, this place was immense on the inside, and
Yeah.
it was incredibly brightly lit. which is what damaged my eyes and I think may have contributed to my burns. Everything was white or stainless steel, and there were the little gray guys, and I guess there are a variety of those. Those come in different flavors, I'm told, too.
They come in various different flavors, colors, forms. Um,
The
the
ones
one
I
thing,
saw,
the one thing about grays in general is that they started off basically like us, and their race survived a nuclear war. That seems to be the common genetic damage from nuclear war, is to produce a gray-like being in the survivors. And they tend to be sterile, and so they survive by cloning. But cloning only works so long. And then when they get to the end of it, they have so many genetic errors.
that they need fresh material.
They need fresh material. And that's why these beings are coming to us, is because we're fresh material.
Yeah. Well, I had a theory about them, and I put it in my book, and I said that I thought that they were more like, I described them as worker bees. Um,
Their culture, their society structure is more like a hive mind.
yeah,
They're telepathic, and they that telepathic races tend to be a hive mind or a hierarchical system, one of the two. The Draco are telepathic, but they're hierarchical. And the Mantids are telepathic and very much a hive mind, where only the queen actually does the thinking for everybody. And their culture is very regimented. Nobody has any free will, and you basically work all of your waking hours. So the range of what people do out there is very wide. And humans are unusual in that we are not naturally telepathic.
no,
And
they're not.
it, in fact, I have to be very careful, because if I look into people's eyes, I will sometimes make a connection without meaning to. And your average everyday human being assumes they have privacy in their own head.
Yeah. I can
And
speak from experience. I had an experience. I told you that I was visited by an entity in 2017.
Mhm.
Um, and the backstory is too long to get into, but in essence, she appeared in my house. She was in my living room. I woke up in my favorite chair in the living room with that sedated, calm feeling.
Oh, gee.
Yeah. Um, and I describe in my book the woman. I gave her the name Betty because she wore all black. She had these thick black nursing shoes with a high heel to compensate for her short stature, and the sleeves of her blouse were extra long because there were four long fingers sticking out. And this black wig, the back of her head was bulbous,
Mhm.
too big for a human wig. So this wig was all sideways. And I called her Betty, believe it or not, because she reminded me of the cartoon character Betty Rubble from the Flintstones.
Okay.
So that's how she got named Betty. But when she appeared in my house, my first thought was, "What are you doing in my house?" And she said, I heard her telepathically in my head, as clear as any spoken word I've ever heard. "It's nice to see you again, Terry." And I asked, "Does this have something to do with these things in my leg?" And she fired back, and I realized we were speaking telepathically, and it seemed natural until I had the thought, you know, what if I think of something that makes her angry? Or what if I think of something that's inappropriate? I mean, think about telling a group of fourth graders, don't think of elephants. Well, what are they going to do?
Exactly.
So just the mere thought of that, I had every inappropriate type of image you could imagine running through my head. And she looked at me, and she looked with a combination of, I think, embarrassment and confusion. And she said, Terry, you can keep some of your thoughts private if you just.
Yeah, you can. We
I
call
hope
that,
so.
we
I've always
call,
wondered if that was just said for my benefit or if that's true.
that's true. It's called front door telepathy.
Okay.
And it's like holding a conversation, and you can still think what you want in the back of your head, but the front door conversation is just what you want to say.
Yeah.
And when I do have telepathic conversations with people, humans, I use front door telepathy. When I interact with ETs or interdimensionals, depending on the race, whether I use that or full intimacy telepathy. With Draco,
Close your mind and give yourself privacy.
full intimacy telepathy is the required form for interacting with Draco.
Okay. And
It
the
is.
intimacy, I mean, explain.
It's everything in their head comes to you, and everything in your head goes to them.
Okay.
And it's a form of, they consider it to be honorable discourse, proving that you are not hiding anything or being duplicitous.
Sure, it's an open book. That the word intimacy makes sense in that used in that phrase.
And it's their normal interaction with each other. And when they do it with humans, it feels like your eyeballs are like your brain's being sucked out your eyeballs.
You know what? That's one of the memories. I should tell you that story real quick because I think it's important. When I was on board this ship, I recall I was standing in this atrium, and the only thing I could move was my eyes. I could not move a muscle. And I had all of my clothing and my boots in my hands like this. So they'd taken all their clothes off. And I could perceive, even though I couldn't see him, that my friend Toby was next to me. But I'm looking around, and I'm seeing these gray guys run. There was a lot of activity. I'm seeing these gray guys going around all over the place. But all I'm hearing is silence. I saw a thing that looked like a golf cart. It didn't have a roof over it. It looked like a golf cart with no wheels, and that was moving along. I mean, it would seat 6 or 8, maybe 9 adults, and it was the gray guys, and it was just motoring along. But in all this chaos that I see going on around me, there was this entity that had a pinkish, chalkish skin tone. He was not gray. He was 6 foot in height. He had sparse hair on top of his head. He had just holes for ears, a slit for a mouth, no cartilage for a nose, just 2 nostrils. And he had large black eyes, but they weren't like the motion picture exaggerated huge eyes.
Yeah.
These were just like a pair of wraparound Ray-Bans. And he caught my attention because I could see that he carried himself with authority. You could tell sometimes how people walk, that they are or consider themselves to be or may actually be someone who is in authority.
Yeah.
So I'm straining my eyes as far as I can to the left to look at this guy because he's interesting. I'm scared to death, but he's interesting. And just by happenstance, he turned his head and we locked eyes. And this has been a recurrent nightmare, for 40 some years. The second that we locked eyes, this guy was in my head, like you said.
Yeah.
I felt him in my head. He knew me. He knew my secrets. He knew my wife. He knew everything about me.
Yeah.
And my mind was an open book. And,
that's full intimacy telepathy.
well, all I got reflected back from those eyes was just raw intellect. The analogy that I like to use is we had a family dog, a golden retriever, who would put her head in my lap, and while I'm watching TV, and I'd reach over and I'd pet her, and she'd look up at me with those big brown eyes, and
Mm-hmm.
um, but we had a relationship.
Yeah.
She knew that I was the alpha, and I would take care of her. I was her
Mm-hmm.
caregiver. I provided her with love and affection, and I, you know, looked into her eyes, and I could see that trust. And she looked into my eyes, and like I said, recognized me as the alpha. Um, when this thing happened to me with this pinkish white guy on board this ship, I was the dog in this equation.
Yeah.
I felt so inferior on all levels.
Yeah.
Um, it was a most humbling experience of my life.
Yeah. Um, that's what we interact with on a regular basis out there is natural humans are so outclassed. The German officers have a ritual where they take in black goo because it will double or triple your IQ overnight and put you at the same level as the ETs we work with. But
That would be nice to be on an even playing field. I think that would have to be.
the trouble is that it does so at the expense of your humanity. You lose your emotional life. The only emotion you can feel after that is anger.
How about ethics? Do you lose your ethical standards and your ethical view of the world and how to treat people and the like? Is that part of it too?
Um, their culture is different. So they have a culture that's based on aggression, for lack of a better term. It's a warrior society. So the culture is based on aggression. Their ethics are based on a more logical worldview,
More practical.
more practical rather than religious. And so any leeway that you would have gotten because of the person's affection towards you, that's going to be gone.
I see. I see. So it really is an even playing field at that point, isn't it? I mean,
It's an even playing field at that point, and that's why so many of the German officers are willing to do it, is because it evens the playing field.
yeah.
And because their culture is a warrior society. And I'm not talking about a military society, I'm talking about tribal warriors. Okay, this is their honor is to serve the civilization, the breakaway civilization. It's called Das Bundes, the Federation, and it is the name translates into the German Federation of Free States. And each colony is its own country
Okay.
within this federation. And each colony has its own militia and contributes to the military that defends all of them. And it's a tribal system. So each colony is considered its own tribe. And because they traveled back in time and got their own people to found these colonies, a lot of the older colonies actually are made up of members of specific Germanic tribes. So
That takes me back to history. I mean,
they are the source of the myth of the Valkyrie.
okay.
They were traveling back in time. They sent female warriors to harvest the warriors who were going to die. And they would take their heads, just like in the mythology, take them on board ship, put them into a regen tank, and they would grow their body from the head. Just like the legend says happened when the Valkyrie would hold the head up in the Hall of Valhalla, that their body would grow down. They had the mythos completely perfect. And that happened because the Germans in space knew the mythology and made sure it happened. And I know this because I was one of them. So my altar's name was Penelope Valkyren because I was a Valkyrie.
Well, I think back German history prior to I think it was the Austro-Prussian War, when Germany was fragmented into so many different states, and each state was an independent, autonomous region. And then it was after that war that
the Austro-Prussian War brought them together. And from that point on, the rest of Europe has been trying to split them back up.
Yeah.
Because united, they were so powerful.
Yeah.
But yeah, they're all tribal. And they were so used to being tribal that when they broke up the Prussian Empire and created the Weimar Republic, nobody knew how to rule a tribal people using democracy.
Well, that wouldn't work in a tribal system.
No, it didn't.
Yeah.
And that was why we ended up with the mess that is called World War II. So, yeah. Anyway, we have 10 minutes for you to blatantly plug anything that you have going.
Great. Well, I appreciate that. And we could sit here and I could talk for hours. There's so much more I'd like to say. I do have a book. My book is on Amazon, and it's available in Kindle, or there's a paperback that has photographs in the back that are pretty interesting. And I also made an audio book in my own voice, and I read the entire book. So anyway, check me out on Amazon, Incident at Devil's Den, or you can go to terrylovelace.com, or you can catch me on Facebook at Incident at Devil's Den. And I answer everyone's emails. As I said, I put an email in the back of my book, Incident at Devil's Den, and I've had 1,400 responses.
Oh.
So I've had so many people share their experiences with me. And what's cool is this thread of commonality that runs through these people. They send me these emails, and they all start out the same, with a semi-apologetic tone, or please don't think I'm crazy. I know this is going to sound nuts. I promise I wasn't drinking at the time, and those kind of disclaimers. And then they go on to tell me these absolutely amazing stories that just blew me away. And when a 79-year-old woman from Las Vegas emails me and tells me about this, her and her husband seeing a Christmas store lit up with a trillion lights that on their trip from Las Vegas to Reno, that they made on a monthly basis. And he was a physician. She was she had a degree in arts and fine arts, but she didn't work outside the home. So on this trip, she told me that they saw this Christmas store, and it made a big impression on her because she had never seen. This was 1968. She had never seen a store devoted to just Christmas stuff. And it was a building that set back from the road, and this was around 10 o'clock at night, and she says, "They're open, why don't you pull in?" And he slows down the car, and he's looking for a driveway, and there is no driveway. And then they notice there's no parking lot. It's just sagebrush and sand.
Oh
and
my.
There's no trucks, there's no cars, there's no nothing. And just this place is insanely lit up with lights pouring out. and a truck, a trillion blinking and flashing Christmas lights draped all around it. So she thinks that they stopped. He doesn't think they did. He thought that they made just a rolling stop. And then they went to Reno and slept for 10 hours until their friends woke them up with a phone call.
Mm-hmm.
And
Alrighty.
could not get that Christmas store off of their mind.
Yeah.
And they had to make a drive back. Tonopah is the name of the town. And they drove down. It was just 10 miles or less on the other side, on the north side of Tonopah. And there's nothing there.
No.
Nothing there. As a matter of fact, they went as far as talking to the guy that was the head of the Chamber of Commerce.
Yeah, I went through Tonopah last year in September.
Is there still a restaurant there called the Stagecoach?
Oh yeah.
There is. I'll be darned. Yeah, because she told me that's where they always stop. They always stop there for gas and have a meal.
I didn't go in the restaurant. We got gas there, but yeah. I have friends on Facebook who decided to all vacation together in Vegas, and of course, I had to come along.
Absolutely.
Absolutely, and I live north of Yosemite, so it was the time of the year we went across Yosemite and then down 395. So yeah, um, on our way back, we had this issue. We stopped to eat at the place. It's out there that the whorehouse out there has a restaurant. And while we were there, everything on our camera chip got deleted.
Wow.
So we had gone to Area 54 and interacted with tall whites. We had gone to Area 51 and goofed around at the gate. And I bought a T-shirt at the Quonset Hut store by Area 54, and we had eaten at the Little Alien, and
I gotta go to Little Alien. Yes.
yes, and our waiter followed us out trying to figure out who I was with because I guess I was overly friendly with my friends, but one's very tall and broad and from Australia, and the other one's almost as tall and almost as broad and from Canada, and is who wrote my theme song at the beginning. So
Really?
really, Kevin Estrella of Pyramids on
I
Mars.
know Kevin Estrella.
Kevin Estrella wrote that song for me.
That's beautiful.
It
Kevin
is.
Estrella is a very talented guy. He's on Artist First, right?
Yes. He's an incredible man, and he's going to be on my show second weekend in December.
Will you please have to give him my kindest regards?
I will. He's a great guy. I love him dearly, and he's the first rock musician to ever write a song for me.
You know what? That
And
means a lot. That means
that's 2 years down the road, and I'm still jazzed as hell.
yeah.
You saw me at the beginning rocking out to it.
It was great. It's good music. Well, of course, Kevin Estrella. What do you expect? Yeah.
Yeah, it's Kevin Estrella. So, yeah. So, yeah. It was Kevin Estrella and the man who had been my commanding officer for 15 years in Nacht, Waffen, and my partner and I and Misha. And we were friends goofing off together, had a blast.
Nice. Nice.
So,
You know, isn't it nice to be with someone that understands and
that is so rare to be with someone who understands and someone who isn't judging me and telling me that what's coming out of my mouth could not possibly be true.
Yeah.
And I will say that there was one point that Kevin told me to shut up, that he had had enough.
That's okay. That's okay.
And I was like, but I thought I
Oh.
was being good. But yeah,
I
I love.
remember first time I ran into the first abductee, open abductee that I ran into was Travis Walton
Hmm,
at a before I published about 6 months before I published my book. Ran into him at a event in Houston, and I went over and I said, "Hey, how you doing, Mr. Walton? My name's Terry Lovelace, and I had an experience in 1977 where I was abducted." And he kind of rolls his eyes, but is very, very polite, and says, "Well, it's nice to meet you, Mr. Lovelace." And we started talking, and we talked for about 4 hours. uh,
yeah, I debated showing you this or not. This is what's left. Okay, camera. Left of the scar from where I was abducted in 1995.
Holy cow!
It this one, and it was two perfect squares on point,
Yes.
and the thing underneath it itched so bad that I literally shredded the design trying to make it stop itching.
Yeah.
And finally, my partner Lou took his car mechanic um, magnet and just held it over it, and it stopped itching after that.
Wow. Wow. And he
So,
did that intuitively.
yeah, well, Lou is special, and I'm not going to talk about him on air.
No, no, that's okay. I understand.
And our time is up. And thank you so much for coming.
Thank
I've
you. Thank Odin. I appreciate you both.
I've had a wonderful time talking with you, and I hope our audience has too.
Yes.
And our audience, stay tuned for Goddesses and Devils with Katie Camara and Amanda McManus. They will be on at the top of the hour. Thank you.